Now let's go to the third candlestick, which is the narrow spread up candlestick. What is the outfit of this candlestick? How does it look like on our charts? It has a small body where the closing is higher than the opening price, but ever so slightly. And because the closing is higher than the opening price, the color of the candle is green. So it's a bullish candlestick. Usually it has little to no wicks on either side. And when we compare where the price started to where it ended, the buyers won, but the buyers barely won when we compare it to the wide spread down candlestick that we saw earlier on. And for this one also, there are many different ways in which it could have been formed. So we know that during the move, the buyers stepped in, but only a little bit, not as much as how they did with the wide spread down candlestick. And yes, sellers might have stepped in during the printing of this candlestick, undoing the work of the buyers temporarily. This would have created a temporary lower wick. But even if this happened, the buyers stepped in again, they regained control and showed strength overall. Not a lot, but a little bit. And again, you guessed it, we can only see if the sellers stepped in during the printing of this candle by dissecting this puppy on faster time frames. How do we interpret this narrow spread down candlestick? We know that the buyers barely stepped in, and we know that, yeah, sure, the sellers might have stepped in, and even if they did, the buyers stepped in again. Overall, the buyers had enough strength to have a final score in their favor by a little bit, not by a lot, but by a little bit. So in this case, there is a sentiment in one direction, which is in the buyer's direction, but the sentiment is weak. It's not like the buyers are clearly winning. The buyers are like, winning. Therefore, this is a sign of strength, but of weak strength, because the buyers are not incredibly strong, you know? They're not like the Hulk. They're like a tiny chihuahua strong, but they're still strong. And that's when you hear people say that it's a sign of mild or weak strength. And what this usually means for what is likely to happen with the price next is that the price is likely to continue going up, but not as likely as when we see a wide spread up candlestick. And this is the reason why I gave it a 1 out of 3 arrows of the likelihood of the price going up. Candlestick number 4, the narrow spread down candlestick. The visual characteristics of the candlesticks is that it has a small body where the closing is lower than the opening price. Not very lower, slightly lower. Because of this, the candlestick is of red color. It's a bearish candlestick. Usually it has little to no wicks on either side, and when we compare where the price started to where it ended, the sellers barely won. And again, there's more than one way in which this candlestick could have been formed. So we can say that during the move, the seller stepped in a bit. Not a lot, but a bit, because if the seller stepped in a lot, it would be a wide spread down candlestick, or it would have a long lower wick. And it is possible that the sellers might have stepped in during the printing of this candlestick and therefore undoing the seller's work temporarily. You know, this would have created a temporary lower wick. But even if this happened, the seller stepped in again. They regained control and showed a little bit of strength overall. Not a lot of strength, but a little bit of strength. And you guessed it, whether the buyers offered some resistance during the printing of this candle can only be confirmed by opening this candlestick on a faster time frame. So how do we interpret this narrow spread down candlestick? We know that the sellers barely stepped in. And yes, the buyers might have stepped in, you know, creating the lower wick. And even if that happened, the seller stepped in again, undoing that temporary lower wick. Overall, the sellers had enough strength to have a final score in their favor, not by a lot, but by a little bit. So in this case, there's also sentiment in one direction, which is in the seller's direction. But it's not like the sellers are clearly winning. They're like, winning. So there is weak sentiment in the seller's direction. So in this case, if I were to ask you, is this a sign of strength or is this a sign of weakness? What would you say and why? The answer is, in this case, there is a sign of weakness, because from the buyer's perspective, the buyers are weak because the sellers are winning. And what this means for us when it comes to what is likely to happen to the price next is that the chances are there that the price is likely to continue going down, but not as likely compared to when we have a wide spread down candlestick, which is why I gave this a 1 out of 3 arrows when it comes to the probability of the price continue going down. It's not guaranteed that the price is going to continue going down.